So I want to welcome everybody to today's edition of 22nd Century Management with Ken. Thanks for joining us for our discussion today. I'm fortunate to have with me a really good guest. I have Bob Kohlhepp, and he has an interesting background. He worked for Cintas for almost forever, but I think it was 50 years, Bob. Is that right?
That's correct. Just short of 50 years.
And you started as a controller and you wound up as chairman of the board. So you want to tell us a little bit about your journey and how things progressed for you?
Sure. Well, I joined the company in 1967 as controller, as you said, and then I got promoted to chief financial officer, and then to executive vice president, then the president and chief operating officer, then the chief executive officer, then the vice chairman, then the chairman over a span of about 50 years. Very fortunate to be with, in my judgment, one of the, if not the best managed companies I've ever seen. We had sales in 1967 of $1.6 million. Today we do 8 billion. We had employees when I started in 1967, 62. We now have about 41,000. And I don't mean to suggest I did all of that. It was a whole bunch of people that made that happen. But I learned a lot in that 50-year process, made a lot of mistakes, learned from those mistakes. But it was a wonderful organization, a well-managed company in every way. And I feel blessed because of it.
Okay, well, very nice. So let me ask this to start with. You wrote a book. You want to give us the title? I don't have that slide up in front of me.
It's called Build a Better Organization.
Okay. And so what motivated you to write Build a Better Organization?
Well, I've done a lot of teaching, both within Cintas, the company I worked for 50 years, at a university I've been involved in, in a number of other venues as well. And just about every time I would finish with one of my presentations, people would walk up to me and say, "You should write a book. We really got a lot out of this. It was wonderful," and so on. Never pulled the trigger. But one day in the mail, I got a book written about a gentleman named Bill Campbell, from three of the people. It was written by three of the people he mentored. He also mentored Steve Jobs of Apple fame. And I really liked the way the book was put together, the way it was formatted. It checked points at the end of each chapter on things to remember and so forth. And I was really excited about that. And as I said, I think I've been very fortunate to be part of one of the best managed companies I've ever seen. And I decided at that point that I should write a book because I didn't want to take all this wonderful experience and knowledge that I had to my grave with me. I thought I should put it down in a book.
Oh, very nice. And I love the thought behind it. It was kind of interesting. I talked before about the fact that I teach service management. And in the copier industry, it was an industry that notoriously just walked up to somebody and said, "You're the manager," walked away and left them to sink or swim. And it made me nuts watching that. And I thought, well, when I retire, I have the background and the knowledge. That's what I'll start to do, is teach that as a course. So you went the book route, I went the course route, but there's a lot of need for people to help people learn to be managers.
Absolutely.
So, okay, when you became CEO, what were some of the changes that you made from Mr. Farmer, who had run the company before you?
Well, Ken, I really didn't make any changes. Dick Farmer just did a fantastic job in running the business. In 1995, 1994, he made me chief executive officer. The company was doing extremely well. My biggest concern was, how am I going to do as well as he did? So I really didn't change hardly anything because it was very successful. We had a very defined culture in the company. And I looked at it more as a relay race. He had the baton. He decided he didn't want to run quite as fast as he used to run, so he handed me the baton. And my job was to run as fast or faster than he did. The company was extremely successful, so there was no reason to change anything.
Okay, so you talk about corporate culture, and then your book's about that. So let's talk about some of the things in Cintas that made it a good culture and a good environment to retain people and made it a good place to work, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we decided many, many years ago to define our culture, and we made that decision because we had lost a few management employees, And in analyzing that, we concluded that the reason we lost them was they were not compatible with our culture and our values. But we also recognized that it was our fault because we didn't define what our culture and values were, and we didn't hire those people, sharing that culture and values with them. And in retrospect, we realized we probably shouldn't have hired them in the first place. So we very painstakingly wrote down in a book called "The Spirit Is the Difference" what it was like to work at Cintas. What did we believe in? What did we stand for? What were we trying to accomplish? And our culture was made up of three key elements. The first was a principal objective. We wanted to have a one sentence objective that drove every major decision in the company. And our principal objective was to exceed our customers' expectations in order to maximize the long term value for our shareholders and for our partners, which we called our employees. And that one sentence drove every decision we made. And it was extremely helpful to us. So that was the first part of our culture. The second part of our culture was defining our character. We called it our corporate character. How do we feel about our customers? How do we feel about our employees, our partners? Honesty and integrity. How we expected people to go about doing their jobs, professionalism, and so forth. And so it defined the environment and the values that we had as a company. And the third part of our corporate culture was our management system. We had a system where when we had a recurring problem, a recurring issue, we would define the solution to that problem in writing that we called a policy and procedure. And we had a corporate policy and procedure manual that spanned the whole company. And then each operating division and each staff department had a policy manual. And that didn't mean that we just did those things blindly. If there was a situation that the implementation of the policy didn't make sense, we had told people, you have to make a decision, you get an exception. If you have to act right away, you act and then tell your boss about it later. But it created sort of the Bible that we use to run the business every day. And those three things, our principal objective, the definition of our corporate character and values, and our management system, is what we called our corporate culture. It was extremely difficult for our competitors to copy because it was intangible. They couldn't see it. And so we believed very strongly that every organization, everybody in the boat, so to speak, in the organization has an oar. If you can get the vast majority of the people in any organization rowing in the same direction, and by that we meant being compatible with our values and our culture, it became an awesome force and something our competitors simply could not emulate.
You said a lot of things in there that I really like. And I'm trying to go back to and remember several of them. The first piece of it is I like the way you defined it. Based on listening to your conversation, it looks like those are more than just a sign on the wall. Because I go into companies all the time and they have these mission statements and things on the wall, but you don't really necessarily see them in action or that people buy into them. It's more like it patches over a hole or something that's in the wall. And I'm sure you've been in companies that are like that. But so I think that's huge. And you talked about the policies and procedures. And that's one of my things. In fact, very similar to what you just said is when I'm working with service managers, I tell them if they have a problem that occurs more than a couple of times, it needs to be addressed as a procedure. You need to figure out what's causing it and what are the steps to prevent it and put it in writing so that you don't keep fighting the same fire over and over again. I like too very much the fact that you talked about empowering the employees and trusting them to make a decision that might even go against the policy, as long as they make smart decisions. I'm sure you had people that made the wrong decision, but that's part of life, right?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that I've said to people many times in and outside of our company is the phrase, the answer is never in your office. When you have a problem, don't think you're going to find the answer to it in a meeting or reading reports. Go out and talk to your customers. Go out and talk to your employees. And you will find out what the problem is. And if you talk to your employees, they'll usually tell you how to fix the problem. And wondering why in the world you've allowed it to go on as long as you have. And so you have to respect the people that work for you at every level, and create an environment where the janitor can question the CEO about how you're doing something. It's up to the CEO to create the environment where the janitor has the guts to say it to the CEO. And it's up to the CEO to have his or her ears open to hear what the janitor is having to say. And too often, people, because they have a college degree and maybe the people they're managing don't, or they have the title manager or supervisor behind their name, think they know more than the people doing the work. They don't. The people doing the work know exactly what's wrong, and they'll usually know how to fix it. But too often, management doesn't go out and solicit their input.
Yeah, I was going to say, and too often they don't want their input. I spent some time working at a couple of major corporations when I was in the copier industry. And in both cases, there were times when I saw very clearly things that needed to be done that would make life much better, more consistent, and solve problems that the current processes were creating for our customers. And as soon as I started talking about those things, the no, we can't do anything about that. Part of it was the internal silos that exist in companies where everybody's got their little empire and they're going to run their empire that way. And you can't talk to or about somebody else's empire. So having that environment you describe has got to have had a huge impact.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing too is part of our culture was to strive for excellence. And in order to strive for excellence, you have to accept the fact that nothing you are doing is as good as it can be and will be in the future. So you have to constantly be challenging everything you do, trying to make it better, getting your people involved in helping you make it better. Because if you aren't improving, you got these people called competitors that are going to catch you and pass you. So it's incumbent for any company that strives for excellence is to constantly be leading, constantly be improving, never accept anything to be as good as it can be. And we used to call that positive discontent. Peter Drucker wrote in a book one time, great companies have an air of positive discontent. What positive discontent meant to us is every policy, every system, every product, everything we did can be and has to be better in the future.
Yeah, that, and again, that's so interesting because so many people are of the opinion, don't rock the boat. And the thing that would drive me nuts, and I worked for smaller companies, and you'd ask them why we do something a certain way. That's the way we've always done it.
Yeah, the worst answer you can give.
Yeah, because that means you haven't explored new ideas and new ways.
Yeah.
And I think the term is negative entropy, which basically means that, that if you leave things alone, that they're going to decline. They're going to get continually worse and worse and worse, and not necessarily like decay, but just the sense that they're going to become farther and farther behind behind the competition and behind the technology that's moving forward around you.
Yep.
One of somebody that I listen to often says, he makes a statement that the status quo is the enemy of everything that will be. And yet so many people like status quo.
Yeah. Well, I used to say if you're doing anything the same way you did it 5 years ago, it's probably not the right way to be doing it. So,
Yeah.
but I think you have to create an environment where you not only accept change, but you embrace change. You're constantly trying to change to get better because the day you think you're as good as you need to be is the day you quit getting better. And that's what
Yeah.
we meant by positive discontent.
Yeah. And it's interesting because that's exactly what I tell service managers, is that you constantly want to get one. I use the expression 1% better all the time, because if you're always just getting even just a little bit better. I mean, some of the stuff as a service manager, when they come into an organization or when they get promoted, there's some low hanging fruit that they can pick pretty easily. But then after that, it's just a steady process of trying to get better. Look at everything, constantly try to see what you can do to level up your people, what you can do to level up your organization, your customer relations. All of those things are so important. And yet, there's lots of examples of people that don't understand that. I don't know if you've read the book. Probably one of my favorite books was Customers for Life by Carl Sewell. And he runs or was running at least, the most successful and highest rated luxury car dealership in the United States.
Oh, it's right here in Naples, Florida. Sewell Cadillac.
Yeah, well, it
Yeah.
started in Dallas, and that
Did
shows
it?
you how far,
Right.
and he's still in Dallas.
Mhm.
But what he does is he has this incredible focus on trying to make customer service better constantly. And so many companies, I get so aggravated when I go into a company that doesn't have good customer service. So again, I like the fact that you talked about going out and talking to customers. I encourage my service managers to have a like a lunch and learn, which is in most places it's you're going to bring people in and sell to them. I've said bring people in, you pick some unhappy customers, some happy customers, bring them in and ask them what they don't like about doing business with you.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah,
if you can find those answers, you can fix your company.
exactly. Well, the other problem I see too is, and one of the things we preached incessantly was to revere our customers. When we would teach our corporate culture course, I would teach it a lot myself. I would say, you got to understand something. We, without customers, we couldn't pay your paycheck. We couldn't buy any more uniforms. We couldn't buy any more trucks. We wouldn't have a company. So what we need to do, we said we have two rules about the customer. First rule was the customer's always right. But then we said, well, we need to have a second rule because sometimes customers are unprofitable, sometimes they're rude, sometimes they're hard to deal with, sometimes we have this problem or that problem with them, and we'd say the second rule is go back to rule number one. You just have to take care of your customers, and I think unless you create an environment, a culture where people revere our customers, will do whatever it takes to make them happy, then you start taking customers for granted, and that's the worst thing in the world you could do.
I like the fact that you made that was actually a class
Oh yeah.
uh, that you taught. I think that is again, it's so important that I see, and of course, especially being in the service industry, and while Centus was not necessarily in the repair business, you still had the direct customer relationship between your drivers and the customers, and a lot of the same customer service type things that a copier dealer would have. And like I said, I love the fact that you just constantly drove that point home. I think it is just so needed.
Well, we documented it, we taught courses on it, but most importantly, we lived it every day. When anybody was doing anything that was out of sync with our culture, we dealt with it, we got it out on the table, we talked about it, and we remedied it. And as you said earlier, I mean, before Enron imploded, they had a beautiful statement in their annual report about what their overall objective was. Problem is, nobody followed it, especially the people at the top. So it's like a diet. It's easy to say you want to go on a diet. The hard part's doing it every day, and that's what's the same thing's true of culture. It's easy to define your culture. The hard part is living it every single day, and we did that religiously.
Yeah, I love that as a philosophy. So, did you ever think that the company would grow from where it was when you started to where it wound up?
Never. We used to look out 5 years. When we were doing 1.5 million, we had a plan to get to 5 million. When we got to 5 million, we had a plan to get to 10 million, and then 10 million to 25 million. It was done sort of in 5 year increments. If you would have told me in 1967 we'd be doing $8 billion today and have 41, 42,000 employees, I would have told you you were nuts. But each 5 year increment, it seemed very reasonable.
You know, and you just don't know how much I love what you just said, because one of the things that frustrates me about the copier industry is most dealers don't have a 5 year plan. And I think that is so important that you're looking out 5 years. And I'm talking about a plan that actually gets you to where you want to go. I see these bright shiny objects that people take to the bank to try to get some money. When I had my business, I wrote some of those, but they weren't things that I lived by, and most dealers don't live by them. And I think that is such an important piece of it is to build out that roadmap for your company so
Yep.
that you know where you're going and how you're going to get there.
Actually, and then you compare your actual results against what your plan was, and determine, were we aiming too high, or did we not execute, or what changed to cause us not to make the plan? But we'd have a 5 year plan that we'd update annually. We'd review it with our board. We would disseminate it throughout the entire company. Everybody knew in the entire company what we were trying to accomplish, and they knew what their specific role was in helping us accomplish it.
Oh, I said you and I are 100% on the same page because when I talk to service managers I've talked to probably, and taught probably 30 or 40 at least service managers. I don't even keep count, but I think I've had one that had a service plan just for the current year that they knew what it was, but they had no contribution in creating it. And I'm like, if you're managing the department, you should be a part of creating that plan. And I am a fan because it sounds like your planning process was synergistic. I think that and especially in most copy dealerships or smaller companies, that the service department, sales, warehouse, all of the departments need to contribute to that plan, so that first of all they take ownership of it. I think as a piece of it. Secondly, each department, the decisions they make affect some other department, and so by talking together, you can start to work out a plan that makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Our process was, I called it top down, bottom up, top down. So we would sit down and take a division, a particular location. We'd say, we expect you to grow. We think you can grow 10% this year and improve your profits by 12%. That would be the top down. Then the manager would put together a plan, and oftentimes they'd come back with those numbers or something even better sometimes. And sometimes they'd come back short of those numbers. If they came back short, we'd say, well, why can't you grow 10%? Tell us about what the reasons why you can't grow 10% are. If they made sense, we might allow them to grow 6 or 7 or 8%. If they didn't make sense, we'd say to them, look, if you can't grow this thing 10%, I got 20 other guys in this company that I think can. Now you tell me, can you get it done or can't you? And you usually come back and say, oh, we'll get it done. And they'd usually beat it every time.
Yeah, no, I understand. Okay, so what do you think is the most important trait of successful people?
Well, I've been asked that question many times, and I always answer it with this phrase. I believe it is dogged determination. The thing that makes people successful in any endeavor, I don't care what it is, whether you're in business, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, or school teacher, and that is that you're determined enough to set a goal, and then you achieve the goal, because the road to success is always under construction. There's always orange barrels in the way. The people that are successful is that when they confront those orange barrels, they knock them down, they go over them, they go through them, they go under them. But when they get knocked down, when they make a mistake, they dust themselves off and they get right back into the game. Dogged determination, in my opinion, is the number one ingredient that anybody needs to be successful.
I'd agree with you. And it'd be interesting to see how many times, if you could run people that stopped a project, if you could actually see when that project would have been successful and how close they were to success, when they stopped. I had somebody on that I did a podcast. I was trying to remember who it was now, but it was talking about that there was a lady that I think she swam maybe Key West to Cuba, or maybe it was the English Channel. I forget. But anyway, she was swimming and it got really foggy. Oh, it was the Catalina Island was what it was from. Was it from somewhere close to, on the shore close? And then she swam out to Catalina Island.
Mhm.
And the first time it got very foggy and she stopped because she couldn't see. And she was literally, within a quarter or a half mile of Catalina Island when she stopped, but she couldn't see her goal and she stopped. And then she went back after some recuperation and went back and made it in a day when she could see it. But sometimes we lose track of the goal. We don't realize how close we are. And it's so easy to give up. It's hard. Why should I keep doing this? I'm not making any progress.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, I think I do something on leadership. In fact, the third part of my book is about leadership. And the number one trait I have seen in successful leaders is that they have a vision. They have a vision for where they want to take their organization. And people can function when they can see that vision and function very well. The simple analogy I used to use is it's a whole lot easier to put a jigsaw puzzle together when you got the box with the picture on it that you can look at. Okay, that's the boss's job. Create the picture. so that people understand this is what it's going to look like when we get to the objective. Now, constantly changing and moving the objective as you make progress, but the vision, every leader has a vision of what it's going to look like, the picture on the front of the box, and that's something the leader has to paint for everyone.
I agree. And I talk about this in class a little bit about it with service management is a lot of times as a service manager, I felt, and I've seen other service managers that were treated this way, is like they were a mushroom. You keep them in the dark and feed them some manure, and,
Yeah.
and hopefully they survive,
Right.
and it's like, okay, if we just knew where we were going, what we were going to do, what the objective, we could start to create plans.
Right.
But I think you mentioned a piece of it is that's the difference between a manager, and a manager could be an owner, could be but they behave like a manager rather than like a leader. They're just, they've got their fingers and everything, telling everybody what they want them to do. And they're not sharing that big picture. They're not empowering people. And those are things that really unleash the potential of a company.
Absolutely. And you have to communicate it. I mean, I used to say to people, once you create the vision, you have to communicate it ad nauseum. And ad nauseum is a Latin term meaning until you're sick of hearing it. And so you got to constantly be talking. No, here's where we're going. Here's what the vision was. I was on the board of a university where a Jesuit priest was a great leader, and he created a vision for the university. He said, "We want all students to graduate from this university and have a superb education, so that they are morally, spiritually, and intellectually prepared to enter a global society." He repeated that vision over and over and over. Everybody on the board could repeat it verbatim, because and every decision they made, they say, now, is this decision going to help us achieve this objective? That's the responsibility of the top people in the company, to create that vision, in my opinion. And without it, people are just sort of, they don't know why they're doing what they're doing, and that's the worst thing in the world you can have.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. In fact, I like what you said too about the getting everybody to understand, and talking about the piece of them thinking about it from, does this move us toward our objective? And that goes back in part to the business planning process, part to having this clear vision is then the decision criteria becomes, does this decision we're about to make, or what I think I want to do, will that move us in the direction we need to go?
Absolutely.
Now, if you don't know where you're going, any decision works.
Exactly. Exactly. But again, that should come from the top, in my opinion. And then it cascades down throughout the organization. But if the people at the top of the company don't have a vision, you don't know whether your vision, if your department or your particular location is helping the company to accomplish its objective. You don't want to have a vision at a plant level that is in conflict with the vision of the entire company. But top management has to do that, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, that is, it's so interesting that the things that you said, I appreciate it. Who mentored you? Who helped you learn to become this kind of a manager and have this kind of insight?
Well, I was very fortunate. The fellow that I went to work for, who was the founder of our company, his name was Dick Farmer, mentored me my entire career. He was a great mentor. He was tough, but he was not unreasonable. He was demanding, but he was fair. He taught me a lot. I was 23 years old when I went to work for him, and he was only 32. But he's one of the smartest people that I've ever been around, and he was a tremendous mentor to me. And I feel blessed to have known him and be part of and to work for him for so many years. Unfortunately, he just passed away in July, but he was a wonderful man. He started with absolutely nothing and built a multi-billion-dollar company, and I helped him. I was by his side through the whole thing.
Well, that's amazing to have a mentor like that. It was interesting. I had a mentor when I worked for a copier dealership in El Paso, when I had started out owning a dealership and didn't know anything about it, and decided that I couldn't manage salespeople, and sold and went to work for somebody else eventually. But one of the things that he taught me to do, and I guess that's part of why I am so big on the business planning piece, is I would go into Tony's office and say, "Tony, I think we ought to do this." And he'd look at me and he'd be like, "What's it going to cost? What's the benefit? What's the risk? What's the ROI?" And after a couple of times I got it, and he made me go out and put that all together on paper and bring it into him. And then I got to the point that I knew that when I walked in with a plan, that I should have a plan rather than a wild idea, and document it and show him those kinds of things. And that was one of the formative things in my career, was what he taught me about that side of running the business.
Yeah. Well, one of the best things I learned from Dick Farmer was having high expectations. I have an entire chapter in my book about having high expectations. If you have high expectations for yourself and for the people that work for you, you will accomplish a lot more. And when I would teach a course on leadership, I'd always say, think in your own life, who got the most out of you? They may not be your most favorite person, may not be the guy or gal you'd go down and have a beer with at the bar, but who stretched you? Who pushed you to do things you didn't think you were capable of doing? And inevitably, everybody in the room would somebody's name would pop into their mind. And I'd say, now, let me tell you something. What all those people had in common, they had high expectations of you. They didn't accept good performance. They wanted excellent performance. And the minute you accomplished something, they pushed you to accomplish something else. They helped you over the humps. Sometimes they screamed you over the humps. Sometimes they pushed you over the humps. But you got over the hump and you said, this isn't that hard. I can do this. And then they did it to you again. And my message to everybody in the room was, now it's your job to do that for the people who work for you. You have to do the same thing. Don't accept good. One of the sayings we had at Cintas was, good isn't good enough. And so strive for excellence, constantly strive for excellence. And if you do that, you will make people better. And I think the art of being a great manager and a great leader is learning how to stretch people without breaking them.
I would agree 100% with that. Well, you know what? I really appreciated having you on, Bob. If you'll hang around for just a minute, I'm going to say goodbye to the folks. And by the way, everybody, for just to be different, I do have next week's topic, leadership insights and loose lug nuts. It's Rocky Romanella. This one's going to be another interesting discussion on leadership. We do a lot of leadership on the channel. And if you're not following my page on LinkedIn, or you're not subscribed to my podcast on audio or my YouTube channel, please do so. It helps it grow. And we thank everybody for watching. We'll see everybody next week.